that the United States were pushing hard for Sweden and Finland to be, well, to abandon their neutrality. Uh, how long was again they were neutral throughout the Cold War and their military, especially in Sweden, they always, they were leaning towards wanting NATO membership, but both the population of Sweden and Finland were always,
Right.
well, the majority was not in favor. How has
We knew that, and we started major efforts. They're still ongoing in countries like
when did it start, or and how was
started
this
in
done? The
2000.
efforts.
It started in 2002. It started in my administration, and it started with a vengeance with Jens Stoltenberg. We wanted Jens Stoltenberg to be the new Secretary General of NATO, and we were absolutely committed to that. We put
Why?
because we knew he was our man. We knew he was going to do what we wanted him to do. We knew he was in mind meld with us about NATO expansion. We're talking about eventually probably every country that we would say is geographically in Europe, no matter how small, no matter how criminal, no matter how undemocratic, every single country in Europe was going to be a member of NATO. And we needed a whole new game with regard to those who were holdouts, either for neutrality or just simply didn't have a population that wanted to be a member of NATO. So we started doing what we do in what we call color revolutions. They were orchestrated within the countries. Each country had its package, and that package consisted of everything from non-governmental organizations to quahogs, quasi-governmental organizations, to government organizations, political visits from senators and representatives. That was a big part of the campaign. And they focused all of these things clandestinely and openly, like the visits by Senate and House delegations, focused on those people within the country that wanted to comply with our wishes, wanted their country to be a member of NATO, no matter how long they'd been neutral, perhaps, like in the case of some of the Scandinavians, wanted their country to be a vassal of the United States in order to get the stars on their shoulders and the tanks and the F-35s and all the other stuff. And it was very successful. We only failed, in my view, we only failed with one or two countries that we had on the top of the target list, principally because, and this is my guess on it, principally because the communist legacy was not like it was in other countries that had been behind the Iron Curtain, nor was it something that scared the Scandinavians or other countries that hadn't been behind the Iron Curtain. In one or two countries, it did that, and you got real welcome for NATO membership. In other countries, it didn't. I would say Viktor Orban in Hungary and maybe Slovakia are two of those countries where there wasn't this feeling that we've been under the yoke of the Soviet Union. We now don't want to be under the yoke of the Russians because they're no different. They just call themselves differently. And so we don't want that. And that made Poland, for example, and others want to be members of NATO, desperately want to be members of NATO, want to be dominant members of NATO. Some of these other countries didn't. So we lost on a couple that we tried this in, but we tried it in every one of them. It worked famously in Montenegro. It worked famously in Albania. I said to Powell, why do we want criminal states in NATO? Albania is it's a criminal state. Montenegro steals more automobiles than are stolen in the United States. What the hell are we doing? How can they pass NATO's credentials for membership? I don't know, he said. But we did. We brought them in, and we orchestrated these campaigns to get what I call tyrannies of the minority. We found the political minority, not the political majority, that wanted NATO membership, desperately wanted NATO membership, and we backed it to the hill. We bought newspapers, we bought magazines, we bought articles, we bought same thing we did in Italy in 1948 when we didn't want the communists to be elected. We bought the Italian government. We bought the Iranian government in 1953. We bought the government in, where was it? Guatemala in 1954, and on and on and on. Well, this was much more sophisticated. This is not CIA agents per se doing this. This is CIA orchestrated campaigns that are run by non-governmental organizations, sometimes wittingly and sometimes unwittingly. It's what we use for Georgia, for example. It's what we're using right now in Georgia, trying to get the current government eked into its political leadership, and then we're trying to get them kicked out. And we're trying to get the government that was there before back in, because they're the ones who want to, stand up to Russia, be a member of NATO, and so forth. But this government that's in right now is very balanced. They want a good relationship with the EU, good relationship with Washington, good relationship with NATO, and a good relationship with Moscow. We don't like that, so we're trying to get them overthrown. That's how we do business today. We don't do business with direct action. We do business with direct action through NGOs and others who, as I said, are sometimes witting and sometimes unwitting. Ones associated with the Republican Institute are most often witting.
And I guess the National Endowment for Democracy would be one of these
That's
key
one of them.
NGOs.
That's a big one. That's a big one.
Yeah.
NED. And you got others too that you don't even think are doing this sort of thing, like FDD. And they're doing it, of course, on behalf of not just the United States, but also on behalf of Israel. Because this is all kind of locked in to where you get multiple parties participating in the planning and the propagandizing. For example, Mossad and the CIA together. You better believe Mossad's in Ukraine.
And was this also the approach towards Ukraine? I mean, we don't even have to go to 2014, but even back in 2004 with the Orange Revolution, because this was done quite blatantly. I remember Yushchenko then back then he even called the EU and the godfather of the Orange Revolution. You had a lot of the interference was quite open, and I guess the Rose Revolution in Georgia 2003, the Orange Revolution in Ukraine in 2004, these were really they were quite extraordinary because there were genuine discontent which could be tapped into on the ground. I mean, there's corruption, democratic deficits, a lot of reasons why you would demonstrate against the government, but the willingness to join NATO, every polling put it about 20%. Nobody wanted to be a part of NATO, but any discontent about corruption, whatever, was hijacked for a very geopolitical objective, which was let's join NATO and against the Russians. But the vast majority of Ukrainians, they preferred to have security arrangements with the Russians, not with NATO. It was just an extraordinary thing to happen. But again, in this media as well, in this country, it was all sold back then as being a huge democratic development. But it's a democratic revolution. Of course, it failed because the Ukrainians never wanted that government. And then we had 2014 again, 10 years later, do the exact same thing, but of course more vicious, purging old opposition. What were your experiences from 2004, the whole Orange Revolution in Ukraine?
I had a CIA agent tell me, Larry, there's never been a weapon or a tool or an instrument of national policy as potent as us now, because we have liberal democracy on our side. Now, think about that for a minute. They had weaponized liberal democracy, and they used all these institutes and other people who were vested heavily in what they were doing, country by country, to implement liberal democracy. And as he said, it is a very powerful weapon, probably the most powerful weapon we've ever picked up. And I think that was a description with nuances all across Europe of what we were doing and what we're still doing. As I said, in Georgia, we just messed up in Romania. We didn't mess up. We succeeded. We got Colin Georgescu out. He was the one who preliminarily looked like he was going to be the new Romanian leader. So we got him out. He's gone. I don't know exactly how we did it, but I know we did it because someone called me and told me they were going to do it, and we did it. And he was gone. I was on that week, I was supposed to call him to talk to him because a person I know really well knows him really well. and he was getting real cold feet. And he wanted me to talk to him and to try and beef him up. And I said, what the hell am I going to say to, I don't know him from Adam. How am I going to beef him up in terms of his staying around? Well, he says, well, they're going to destroy him. They're going to get him. I knew they were going to get him, and they got him. That's, were they doing that in 2004 in Ukraine? They didn't have to be quite that straightforward about getting rid of people in 2004. But yes, we were running people from European command down into Ukraine as early as 2005 and 2006 to begin to work with, ready for this, the Azov battalions and others like that, in order to ensure that we were operationally capable of melding intelligence and arms and other things. And we even had a 4-star general who liked to ride big bikes, Harleys in particular, who occasionally would, as a 4-star general, get on his bike and go riding and do coordinating. This was all happening before the really tense period of 2014 when, we took sides so blatantly it was pitiful. We were working on it all along.
But some of this instrument for regime change or color revolutions, as they were called, has some of this been dismantled now? Because Trump, he had this defunding,
That's
and
a huge question.
yeah,
Yeah, that's a huge question. I asked the other day if Tulsi as DNI and Ratcliffe, I was told Ratcliffe is in on all this. He's in favor of everything that's going on. So I said, well, you're telling me Tulsi's not and Ratcliffe is? How the hell is she going to turn him around? No answer. If Ratcliffe is neocon par excellence or whatever he is, but is intent on keeping all of these things going come hell or high water, and boy, do I know about the CIA keeping things going when the President of the United States, the Secretary of State, and the Secretary of Defense don't even know they're doing it. That's the common practice now. And the director will come back and say, well, we've got to give the president plausible deniability. You mean you're killing people without the sanction of the President of the United States in a formal decision memorandum? In a presidential finding or something? You're killing people on the ground in a foreign country? No comment. And it goes on from president to president because the president doesn't have any clarity on what's happening on the ground with the CIA, and the CIA has become its own independent actor within the national security establishment. And people warned about this. People warned about this when we created the DNI too, and thought the DNI would be the person that would, consolidate power and be uncontrollable by the president. But the DNI has never been given money and people power. Trump promised to do that with Tulsi, but as far as I know, he hasn't done that yet. If you don't have money, if you don't have control over the budget and the black budget too, and you don't have control over people, that is, you can't move people per their cleverness, their talent, their agility, whatever, from the CIA to INR at state, or from INR at state to the DNI or office or staff or the CIA or whatever. If you can't do that, then how powerful are you? If all you can do is pontificate, how powerful are you? Now, Trump promised to give Tulsi because she knew that, and she made it a condition of her hiring for the position that he give her money and people power. And I have seen no indication of that. Ratcliffe is doing whatever the hell he wants to do, and Tulsi's not really supervising. And what Ratcliffe is doing is anything but, I think, what Trump would have him doing were Trump to be aware of it. So we've just got a colossal mess is what we've got, a typical kind of mess when an empire gets to the end. And no one knows how to control it. No one knows how to stick their finger into the pie and say, nope, pull that cherry out, go away. You can't do it anymore because it's gotten too big and too out of control and too much money flowing into it. Money, incidentally, that's only coming from the printing presses. Ain't nothing behind it.
That's just amazing.
It is amazing. Man, I tell you, As I said, I learned as much from my students, if not more, in their case studies, over 400 of them. We studied everything from the Korean War up to the Obama's incursion into Lebanon. Do you know that Norwegian F-16 pilots led the bombing of Lebanon? Or not Lebanon,
Sorry.
Libya? Norwegian F-16
Yeah.
pilots led the bombing of Libya.
Yeah, I think we dropped 10% of the bombs on Libya.
Unbelievable.
We
Unbelievable.
got 5 million people,
Yeah.
but that was good. Well, that was yeah, good for promoting Jens Stoltenberg.
Oh, you know, one of them was interviewed in my presence. Uh, I can't talk about anything more than that, but he was interviewed in my presence. He was so a young guy, good looking guy, young guy, F-16 pilot, as I recall. But he was so excited that he finally dropped bombs on live human beings. And I'm thinking to myself, man, you think that's an accomplishment? You're Norwegian and you think that's an accomplishment? Dropping bombs on live human beings? Okay, all right. I guess that's the way the Air Force thinks.
Yeah, I think at the time there was some reports in the media that he had told the Swedish Prime Minister that this was a great exercise, well, a good way to test the military, that they should be getting in on this. I've always been curious to what extent did the involvement of Norway in Libya back in 2011 um, helped to boost him into the position of being the NATO Secretary General. Was it the interventionism that put him in favor in Washington, or was it also, I guess, his support for NATO expansionism?
I think it started pretty early. As I recall, he was instrumental in getting us political support from not just one or two countries. I think it was 4 or 5 countries that helped us get political support post 9/11 for what we were doing. You know, we had this colossal chart we drew up after 9/11. And what it had was diplomatic and other missions across the top, countries down the left side, and in each little square thus created was a corner. And what it said was Denmark will provide political support, and our ambassador will take care of getting that. Germany will provide this and that, and the Secretary of State will take care of that. Pakistan will require the president to make a phone call and the Secretary of State or the deputy to visit Islamabad because we need overflight rights, we need passage rights, we need help with logistics. And Uzbekistan. So this thing had every country in the world on it, and every ambassador and every cabinet officer who would implement whatever the president said to do with regard to that country that needed to come above the ambassador. And it included military assistance, it included political support, all things. And we really got some great support out of Jens Stoltenberg in that process. So it was building for quite a while. I would say post 9/11, roughly a year or so, because it took us a while to get that matrix out there and everybody working on it. But probably I'd say at least 2003 forward, it was going bangers, and we were identifying people all along the way. We were casting some of them aside because we said, no, that woman or that guy is not the kind of person we need. Okay, mark that one off. Let's go after this person or that person. And people were on the ground doing this, and our ambassadors, our country teams were doing it. Sometimes, Powell would be the instructor. Sometimes the CIA would be the instructor. Sometimes DOD would be the instructor, as it were. But Powell tried to keep a hand on it, and he tried to understand what was happening in the country team. A lot of, I don't know if you know this, but our country teams have every element of our bureaucracy in them. And the bigger ones have multiple members of that bureaucracy. So for example, you have a station chief maybe for the CIA and all manner of people under diplomatic cover working for the CIA. Often the ambassador in that country and the country team in general, who are civilians, if you will, they don't know what the CIA is doing out of their embassy. Often the conventional military commander who has that particular country in his area of responsibility does not know what the CIA is doing in their AOR. So it's extremely complicated. And Powell was sometimes aware of what was going on, and sometimes we weren't aware of what was going on. If George Tenet decided he didn't want Powell to know about it, Powell didn't know about it. And that continues apace today. If the CIA doesn't want the ambassador and the country team other than his station chief to know what's going on in Pakistan, then they don't. Now, the CIA director sometimes will say, I don't want the ambassador to have to lie. Because if the ambassador's briefed in on this operation and then he's asked a question by the press, he's either going to have to say he can't answer the question, which no ambassador wants to do, or he's going to have to lie. We don't want him to have to lie, so we're not going to tell him about it. That's a hell of an excuse to keep your country team in the dark about something that you're doing in his country that might have severe repercussions if it becomes public. But that's the way it went. And we really worked on Europe. I mean, we worked on Europe. When people ask me, why is Europe so heavily invested in this Ukraine business, I say, well, we got them that way. This is a war between Washington and Moscow, not Kiev and Moscow. Kiev is the instrument of our war.